Today, I'm going to provide some clarity on the topic, going over why fruit is an important food even for a diabetic. We'll go over the best and the worst fruits, including what's considered by many to be the #1 fruit for diabetics. We'll even go over a unique way to consume fruit that will minimize its impact on your blood sugar levels. So let's start by tackling the obvious question. Fruit has sugar. Sugar increases blood glucose levels. Why not just eliminate it from your diet? Well, eliminating fruit can deprive your body of essential vitamins, minerals, and nutrients. In fact, a study from 2017 found that fruit consumption in diabetics was found to lower the risk of death and vascular complications. Now, with that being said, there is sugar in fruit, and the sugar that's found in fruit is in no way magical. If you eat enough, it will spike your blood glucose levels. But the difference between fruit and processed sugar sources like candy or soda is that fruit contains a more complex form of sugar, as well as higher fiber content, all of which contribute to a much more gentle impact on your glucose levels, if eaten in moderation, of course. However, not all fruits are created equal, so let's explore the best and the worst fruits for diabetics next. Starting with one of the most popular fruits, and that's apples. So apples are a good diabetic fruit that can be made even better by picking the right variety and consuming them in just the right way. More about that in a sec. So apples have a fairly low GI score of 39, and GI score is a measurement of how quickly foods will spike our blood sugar levels. And it's one of the metrics we'll use today to help us decide which fruits are diabetic friendly and which are not. Most guidelines suggest that foods with a GI score less than 55 are low glycemic index foods. But to be really safe, I'd suggest trying to stay under 50 for glycemic index, and that's where we'll set the bar today. So apples, as we can see, are well below that threshold. The other metric we'll look at is our net carbohydrate content, and a portion of diabetic-friendly fruit should be less than 15 grams of carbs per serving. And we can see apples with a net carbohydrate count of around 12 grams hits that second goal quite comfortably. So apples are low in glycemic index, low in net carbs, making this a friendlier option for diabetics. But how can you make this fruit even better? First, leave the peel on, and that's because the peel not only contains healthy fiber, but also contains something known as alpha-glucosidase inhibitors. Complicated word, but this is something that can delay or decrease absorption of glucose in the GI tract. The second tip is to stick to green apples rather than red apples. And that's because green apples have more fiber and less carbs compared to red apples. Alright, next fruit up is a really popular one. In fact, maybe even more popular than apples. But it also happens to be one of the fruits we'll go over today that can cause a pretty significant spike in blood sugar. So the fruit I'm talking about, of course, is bananas. Now, bananas have a GI score of 51, just above that sweet spot that we're aiming for. In addition, a cup of sliced bananas comes in at approximately 30 grams of net carbs, well over the 15-gram mark that we're shooting for. So bananas get 2 thumbs down. Now, that's not to say you can never have this fruit, but you have to be much more careful if you do. Now, let's say you decide you want to indulge and have a banana. Is there anything you can do besides limiting your portion size to get bananas to be a bit more diabetic friendly? So there is, and that trick is avoiding overly ripe bananas. It's because the more ripe a banana is, the higher the sugar content and GI score. So aim for bananas with a hint of green still on the skin. And in just a moment, I'll share an additional tip to make not only bananas, but all of the fruits we'll go over a bit more diabetic friendly. Next up is raspberries and blackberries. Both of these fruits have very low GI scores. Raspberries and blackberries have a GI score right around 25 to 30, which is well below our threshold. In addition, a full cup of raspberries or blackberries only has 7 grams of net carbs, and that's due in part to its extremely high fiber content, a whopping 8 grams of fiber per cup. So raspberries and blackberries have a low GI score, a low net carb count, and there's even some studies that suggest eating raspberries may have a beneficial effect on glucose levels, insulin production, and cholesterol. Now, a word of caution. While berries are low in GI and low in net carbs, overindulging can still lead to blood sugar spikes. So moderation is key, even with our better fruits. Alright, next up is pineapple. I wish I didn't like this fruit so much, because as delicious as it is, it really causes my blood sugar levels to climb. And that's due in part to its higher glycemic index. Pineapple has a GI score of 66 and a net carb count right around 19. Both of which hurdle right over our diabetic-friendly threshold. So this is definitely one you need to be more cautious with, and as risky as pineapple can be to us diabetics, there's another version of pineapple you have to be even more careful with. So pineapple is a very popular dried fruit, and dried fruit of all varieties, not just pineapple, can be very dangerous, as even small quantities contain an unexpectedly high amount of carbohydrate. To illustrate that, let's compare fresh pineapple to dried pineapple. So we already know a full cup of fresh pineapple has around 19 grams of net carbs. So what does 19 grams of net carbs look like for dried pineapple? Well, just about 2 small tablespoons of dried pineapple has as much carbohydrate as an entire cup of fresh pineapple. So you can see how just a small quantity of dried fruit can really add up quickly. So be careful with dried fruit, my fellow diabetics. All right, just a quick look at the scoreboard of the fruits we've covered so far. Let's talk about watermelon next. So this fruit has definitely gotten a bad rap. In fact, if you look at the worst fruits for diabetics, watermelon is almost always included on the list. But does it really deserve all of the bad press? Let's take a look. So when we look at the GI score of watermelon, I'll admit it, it's shocking. Watermelon has a GI score of right around 80, and that is the highest GI score of any fruit we've gone over thus far. But it does have one redeeming factor, and that is its carb content, which is surprisingly low. A cup of watermelon only has around 11 grams of net carbs. So while I can't quite recommend watermelon due to its really high GI score, I can say if you do decide to consume this fruit and you're very careful with your portion size, you might be able to make this into a somewhat reasonable option. But proceed with caution. Moving on to strawberries next. Strawberries have a number of benefits for your general health, including tons of vitamin C, antioxidants. There's even been some research indicating that strawberries may hold a key ingredient that will allow us to one day take insulin in a pill. That we'll have to see about. But strawberries are a very diabetic-friendly fruit. They have a fairly low GI score of 40, and as far as carbs, a cup of strawberries comes in at right around 9 grams of net carbs, well below our target of 15 grams or less. Let's talk about grapes next. Grapes are delicious, they come in all different varieties, and they're a key ingredient in a very popular adult beverage. But are they good for us diabetics? Well, let's start with the GI score. Grapes have a GI score of right around 54, and this can vary by the variety, but we know this is above our target. What about carbs? Some of the more commonly consumed red or green grapes can have as many as 26 grams of net carbs per cup. So this is a fruit you definitely need to be more careful with. But I do have some good news for you grape lovers, because there is one variety of grapes that is a bit more forgiving. So if you do decide to indulge, you'll want to stick to Concord grapes. That's because Concord grapes have much less carbs per serving. They are a bit harder to find in stores, but well worth the effort if you can find them. Next up is guava. Now this is one that may not be consumed as often, but guava is a fruit with some hidden benefits, because not only is the fruit itself a pretty good choice, but there may be some benefit to the leaves as well. We'll go over that in just a sec. So guava has a fairly low GI score, right around 32. This can vary depending on the variety, and a cup of guava contains 23 grams of carbs, but it has 9 grams of fiber, knocking the net carbs down significantly right into our comfort level. So 2 thumbs up regarding blood sugar impact. But guava may have one additional trick up its sleeve. So a few studies have indicated that the leaves from guava may have blood sugar lowering properties. How effective this actually is, it's hard to say. There are a number of guava teas available on the market. I haven't tried them, and I'm always a bit skeptical about these things. So it remains an interesting topic to keep an eye on, but I think we need a bit more info on this before we all start going out and buying guava tea. All right, just a couple more before we get to our number 1 fruit. So the next one up is cherries. Now cherries are a really good example of how the same fruit can be good or bad depending on the variety you pick. Now there's 2 popular types of cherries, sweet and sour cherries. So the GI score for sweet cherries is 63. Well above our target range. But sour cherries come in at a much lower GI score of only 22. What about carb content? Well, a cup of sweet cherries comes in at 19 grams of net carbs, and sour cherries only 11 grams of net carbs. So it's important to consider not only the type of fruit, but the variety as well. All right, what about mangoes? This is one of my personal favorites, but I gotta admit, it's another one that's not so friendly on my blood sugars. So mangoes have a GI score of approximately 51. Hitting just above our comfort level. As far as carb content, a cup of mangoes has right around 22 grams of net carbs. So mangoes, unfortunately, is one you need to be more careful with. Here's an updated look at the scoreboard with all of the fruits we've gone over so far. Now, before we talk about the last fruit, which is considered by many to be the number 1 fruit for diabetics, let's first talk about a way to minimize the impact of fruit on blood sugar levels. Reducing this impact, it's easier than you think. Besides, of course, limiting your portion size, the other thing you'll want to do is to add a bit of healthy fat or protein to your fruit. For example, try adding a spoonful of peanut butter to your apple or a few scoops of Greek yogurt to your berries. This added fat or protein slows down the digestion of carbohydrates in the fruit, delaying absorption, ultimately decreasing their impact on your glucose levels. Alright, so what about that number one fruit? Well, it's not just one fruit, but a group of fruits that are considered by many, and this is due to their low GI score, low carbohydrate content, and a number of antioxidants, vitamins, and minerals. Berries like blackberries, raspberries, and strawberries we discussed earlier come highly recommended by many sources.